Did Jesus lie about his second coming? Consider these statements he made in the Gospels. Matthew 16:28, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." We know that Jesus is the Son of Man, so Jesus is saying to his fellow Jews that some of you will not die before you see me coming into my kingdom. Matthew 24:30, "Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." And then 4 verses later, "Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened." Well, here we are, 2023, no Jesus. Pretty sure everyone from his time period has died. What gives? Some people say that Jesus was referring to a later generation. I don't buy that. You don't even see that in the academic commentaries very much, because Jesus was speaking to people who lived in his generation. So if you're trying to make Jesus not lie, you're not succeeding. These two passages, Matthew 16:28 and 24:30-34, certainly sound like Jesus is talking about his second coming. If that's true, then it would be very difficult to escape the fact that Jesus was either lying about his second coming or he was honestly mistaken about it. Either way would be a big challenge for Christianity. So, most Christians will argue that Jesus must have been talking about something else, something other than his second coming. Some suggest that Jesus referred to his transfiguration, or Jesus' resurrection, or when the Spirit came at Pentecost, or when Jesus, quote, came in judgment at the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. To a non-Christian, this probably feels forced, like we're trying to fit an alternative interpretation that doesn't work, and we would never think to do this if it wasn't for the fact that we don't want Jesus to be wrong about something. Well, that's a fair critique. To me, honestly, it does feel forced, but we do it because we are convinced, for other reasons, that Jesus truly is God who does not lie and is not wrong about things. It's easier for us intellectually to give an alternative interpretation to these verses in Matthew than to give an alternative explanation for the evidence that we have to believe the words of Jesus. Even still, it's not like our alternative explanations have no warrant on their own. In 2 Peter 1:16-18, Peter says, "For we did not follow cleverly devised stories when we told you about the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ in power, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. He received honor and glory from God the Father when the voice came to him from the majestic glory saying, 'This is my Son whom I love, with him I am well pleased.'" We ourselves heard this voice that came from heaven when we were with him on the sacred mountain. In this passage, Peter claims that they personally saw the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ in power, but it's obviously not referring to his second coming. On the contrary, it's a reference to the transfiguration of Jesus in Matthew 17. This could explain the coming of the Son of Man in Matthew 16:28, as Craig Blumberg argues in his commentary on Matthew, but it doesn't explain the coming of the Son of Man in Matthew 24, which took place after the transfiguration. Even still, we have learned from this passage in Peter that we don't have to take this to literally mean the one event of Jesus' second coming. Leon Morris, in his commentary, pages 435-436, he says that we must bear in mind that the Son of Man comes in many ways, so we can be open to multiple fulfillments and re-fulfillments of this prophecy. The Transfiguration is one of them. I think the destruction of the temple in 70 AD is another good option. Donald Hagner, in his commentary on Matthew, page 280, argues for this view. He provides several reasons. One being the destruction of the temple foreshadows the final judgment when Jesus physically returns. So it ties in with the physical return of Jesus yet to come. It also is that time period when some people would be dying off but others still alive. One final point I'd like to make is really more of a challenge to skeptics. See, most people who would be so bold to argue that Jesus lied about his second coming would also say that the book of Matthew was written late in history, like 80 AD or later. This would have been after most or all of Jesus' generation had already died off. If that's the case, then you've created a new problem for yourself. Why would the author of Matthew, who is trying to win his audience over to Christianity, choose to include an obvious statement of Jesus being wrong or lying? It seems to me that a late dating of Matthew almost forces the interpreter to acknowledge that the author had something else in mind when he quoted Jesus saying that this generation will still be around when the Son of Man comes into his kingdom. I think that the evidence points to an early dating of Matthew. You can check that out on my video on the dating of the Gospels for that. In any case, whether you take an early or a later dating of Matthew, I tried to show that we have reasons for believing that Jesus really did come into his kingdom during his own generation. But we also look ahead to his second coming and his final judgment at a time unknown. Next week, I'm going to talk about an argument that I hear used all the time against the reliability of the Gospels. It's an argument that I find to be very weak, and I'll share with you why. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Here we go.